Fighting is raging in the Syrian capital, Damascus. These images from a social media site are said to show heavy shelling and destruction in a central district of the city. Insurgents struck close to the heart of the regime on Wednesday, killing the country's defense minister, seen here in file footage, in a suicide bombing. The president's brother-in-law also died. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts to put more international pressure on the Syrian president have also hotted up in recent days. Dramatic developments, Syria at a turning point. Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome. Was Wednesday's attack the beginning of the end for the Assad regime? What would Assad's fall mean for the region as a whole? And what can and should other countries be doing to stop the bloodshed? Those are just some of the questions we want to talk about today on Quadriga with three journalists who've been following events in Syria closely. Stefan Buchen reports for several affiliates of the German broadcaster ARD and has won prizes for his coverage of the Middle East and North Africa. Michael Stürmer is senior correspondent for the German daily newspaper Die Welt. His most recent book is a biography of Vladimir Putin. And Habib Saleh is a journalist and member of Syria's opposition National Council. He fled his country to avoid a 14-year jail sentence for reporting that was critical of the Assad regime. Habib Saleh, some people are interpreting Wednesday's attack as the beginning of the end for Bashar Assad. Would you agree? Is it the turning point?
No, first of all, we have to decide that one operation will not make a new or let's say decisive result for a long war. Long war, long crisis, long revolution, long dictatorship, long period of Assad ruling will never end with one explosion and the killing of some officials. He will have another generation of officials. He will take a more initiative. He will launch. He will intensify his military actions in order to retaliate, in order to uproot the revolution, in order to forward fatal, let's say fatal actions against the revolution in order to stop. He is insisting to be victorious. He is that kind of man with a very bad obstinacy. He is very obstinate, very stiff, very, let's say, strong man. So he believes that the more he can be patient, the more he has the army still following him, still not defected in a high range levels. So he still believes that he could launch victory over the revolution. So one operation will never bring everything to an end.
So Assad very stubborn and determined, but clearly the rebels as well. Stefan Buchen, doesn't this show that they can penetrate to the very heart of the regime? Wouldn't that mean that Assad himself could be in danger?
Nobody knows who carried out this attack against people close to the Syrian dictator Assad. Maybe the rebels claimed responsibility, but nobody knows who exactly did it. Maybe it was one of the inner circle himself. We don't know. But clearly the rebels are strengthening their capacity to strike militarily. This is very clear. They penetrated into the capital, Damascus. Fighting is going on there in several quarters. So we are facing an ever-escalating war in Syria. I wouldn't say this attack against people from the inner circle of Assad was a turning point. It's just a sign of an ever-escalating war, and I believe that this conflict will be decided at the end militarily.
Michael Stürmer, the attack came just as the Security Council of the United Nations was preparing to deliberate yet again. What should the West be doing? Is there any action that could actually be effective in this situation?
Well, the West can do a lot of things, but nothing approaching military intervention. the West can, together with Turkey, play a role in opening humanitarian corridors, providing help, giving the Syrian opposition help, support in building civic institutions, and also giving some advice, because I personally, and I don't think very many people in the West have the foggiest idea of what is there any unifying principle in the opposition, or is it just a collection of people who hate Assad, are not Alawite, and look for revenge? I think that more of an intelligent public relations, just explaining what they really want in the long run, would get them a lot of sympathy, might get them a lot of sympathy. Otherwise, everything is lost in the fog of war. But this Wednesday event might, in retrospect, provide a tipping point. It's not such a big thing. It's not a big tank battle. But it might be a tipping point. You don't know. Tipping points are more a psychological thing than a thing of big numbers.
Let's pass your question right on to Habib Saleh.
Yeah.
Who are the rebels, the opposition? Tell us a bit more what you know, which of course is also from the inside. You yourself are a member of the National Council.
Yes, I would be very concrete, critical, honest, and very simple. To make an introduction to the crisis in Syria, to be objective and to be sincere and to be researching also, we have to say, to come back a little bit earlier, when Assad came to power in 1970 by a military coup. So since
Assad's
then,
father.
In 1970, the father, 1970, by military coup, and he announced martial laws. Martial laws were implemented in Syria for half a century.
Yep.
Syria was known as the Syria of Assad. Syria was known that the republic, the family republic, the ideological republic, the republic of one man, the republic of dictatorship, the republic of pro-West who were negotiating for Barcelona agreement, and at the same time was making, treaties with Soviet Union, and at the same time making the best relations with Iran, the fundamental fanatic idiot republic. So Assad was that man, like the octopus with so many legs. One in Europe.
You haven't mentioned the Alawites.
It's me, Alawite. I am Alawite, but this is Assad. I am not talking about religions. I am talking about the political Syria, the destiny of Syria, the destiny of my nation, and the aspirations that legalize our struggle
Mr. Saleh,
and bring us to modernity and liberty, as the Europeans came to and as many nations came to.
Mr. Saleh, many people are worried that we may very well be talking about religions in the future. There is a great deal of concern that this could degenerate into an inter-ethnic, inter-religious civil war. Do you share that concern?
I draw your one attention. No, I never share. But I draw one attention in order to make my comparison fair and more objective. In India now, an old lady is the president of the republic, and this old lady is a Muslim lady. In India, of the country of 1,500 million. So by democracy, you could have a Muslim over Germany, and you can have an Arab over Italy, and you can have others here and others here. Through democracy, you bring Christians, Islamists, Druze, and all others into the spot, into one country, into one constitution. So you never keep your country entrapped or undermined. So through democracy, you will never produce more fundamentalism and more retaliations and more theoretical, ideological, let's say, philosophy against each other. Let's come to an end by democracy. Let's come to an end by building a civil state. Let's come to an end by following the modern world,
Okay, let's bring in another point of view here. Stefan Buchen has been reporting from the region. Stefan Buchen, do you see an inter-religious civil war as a likely outcome of where Syria is heading, or democracy?
The discussion about democracy in Syria is quite a theoretical one at this point. We are wondering who the opposition is, and I think Habib Saleh is very right to point to history. We have to see what is the development. There was something like an official opposition in Syria, legal opposition parties, maybe comparable to the official opposition in Eastern Germany during the Cold War or in other Eastern European countries. Then there were oppositional individuals, figures who were more let's say, took more risks and a harder stand against the regime, and they paid a high personal price by going to prison, like Mr. Saleh himself. And they were political prisoners because they wanted a real political change towards democracy in Syria. And there were hopes also from Western governments, like the German government, like other governments who thought that Assad is ready to perform reforms within the countries, actually a reformist head of state, and these hopes and this political thinking proved completely an illusion. And now Syria joined the Arab Spring 1.5 years ago by large demonstrations of mostly young people from the countryside, not in the capital, not in the big cities, in regions in Syria which had been neglected by the government, also socially and economically. But these demonstrations were crushed with much violence by the government, and then this uprising turned into a war because the rebels or the demonstrators slowly armed themselves, and they started to fight militarily the government, and then officers and soldiers from the regular troops deserted and joined the uprising. And now we are at a full war, which, as I said, is ever escalating. And so these people now who hold arms against the troops, I'm wondering what is their relationship to people, intellectuals who demanded 3, 5 or 10 years ago a political change in Syria. Maybe there is no relationship and no connection whatsoever. I think that actually we are now in something like a sectarian war. We cannot deny, in my view, the sectarian character of this conflict. The armed opposition is in its majority Sunnite, and it's being supported by Qatar and especially Saudi Arabia. They are paying for their arms, they are arming. The United States is trying to coordinate the smuggling of arms into Syria to support the rebels. And we have a full range of examples during the last months of sectarian violence between the Sunnite and the Alawite communities in Syria. Assad was seen as a dictator who guarantees something like sectarian peace, but this is an illusion. He is supported by the Alawites, and he is now trying to send the Alawite as a sectarian community into the war against the Sunnites, and this is a disaster.
Let's pick up on that Sunnite element, the Sunni element there. Michael Stürmer, Saudi Arabia very involved, as we just heard, in supporting the Sunni component of the opposition. Does that make you optimistic about the prospects for democracy?
I'm not optimistic about the prospects for democracy. We have all gone through the Balkan wars of the 1990s, democracy comes at the end of a very long and painful and realistic process. I don't think it's a formula to start from. It's a great objective, and you can have a democratic peace provided all the other conflicts have been put to rest, or at least are under control, and there is a kind of basic consensus that democracy is better than civil war. That consensus is obviously totally absent. At the present time, it looks like fighting to the bitter end, with a lot of major components impacting from outside. And I would compare this to several chessboards which are sort of put into each other. It's not one chessboard, but perhaps 3, 4 chessboards, and one, the overriding chessboard, is probably U.S. versus Iran. The second chessboard is the Sunni side, led by Saudi Arabia, formerly also by Egypt, versus the Shia side, led by Iran, from Tehran, the Shiite Republic. And that's another very important element. Then where are the Russians? What is the game of the Russians? They are quite important because they can block everything in the United Nations, and they have classical Russian interests, not so much Soviet, Russian interests.
So if we look at this chess game, yes. Let's
multi-dimensional chess game, not just one.
Let's take a look at how that plays out in terms of the Opposition National Council, which, as we mentioned, you belong to. One moment, just if you would, please. Right before the attack on Wednesday, the National Council said Kofi Annan's peace plan has utterly failed, and if we don't get more support from the West, we are going to look elsewhere. Those were the exact words of the spokesman. What exactly does he mean by that?
Let's say that part of any discussions, part of any negotiations should conclude to summary or to some kind of sorting out what we discussed and what we were negotiating. When we say that Saudi Arabia has been supporting the revolution, I could say that we received more support from Germany, European Union, United States, and the liberal free world, more than we received from Saudi Arabia. On the contrary, Assad is receiving help from the most fanatic and conservative republics or powers in the area: Hezbollah, Muqtada al-Sadr militia of Iraq, Iran, and China. And so parallel or face-to-face or in exchange of that side, I think we revolution stand at the side of Europe, and Europe stand at the side of the revolution. And so they never ask us, are you Sunnat or are you Muslim fundamentals, or are you conservative or are you so and so. They only say that 50 years of dictatorship should come to an end. Martial laws should come to an end. Security, intelligent, overwhelming over the authority, over the state, over the rule, over the regime should start. Syria should change into democracy through a transitional period. This is exactly what we, the revolution and Syrian National Council, confirm and look for.
So what are you concretely doing to make sure that it doesn't degenerate into a sectarian conflict and an undemocratic tyranny?
Let me tell you, 3 months before, the Muslim Brotherhood, the major Islamic group in Syria, issued a convention stating their commitment to civil democratic state and civil democratic constitutional elections in Syria.
Secular, civil, state, democratic, made or produced by free elections
overpowered and sponsored by United Nations and by European Union. I can supply you with the convention just today by hand or by email. This is number one. Two, Syria has been ruled by military regime since the 1949. This revolution after 60 years is the only revolution that no communists can ever have the responsibility for or claim the responsibility for, neither United States, nor Iran, nor Saudi Arabia, and even nobody. It was the suffering, the poverty, the isolation, the non-political Syria which made the oppression to the extent which made the revolution fire. The revolution fired without any background, without any fundamental, any conservative, any sectarian backgrounds.
Habib Saleh, just one moment. Michael Stürmer had a comment, and Stefan Buchen as well.
I think that one of the chief concerns in the West, and probably also in the neighborhood concerning Jordan and Israel, is what would happen if the Assad regime falls and no clear political and security control is established. What would happen to the chemical and bioweapons which are available in Syria in vast quantities, having come out of the former Soviet Union?
You ask me.
U.S. Secretary of Defense just issued a warning.
This is the chief concern.
Yeah. So, to start Syrian crisis, or to start with a revolution, or to start anything, etc., the chemical weapons are not number one. Syria, the military, Syria, the nuclear power, Syria, the Iranian, pro-Iranian state, Syria with the Republic of Slaughter, Syria with one-man show is the main problem. If we solve the main problem, we will find a much more solutions for the chemical weapons. And we, as SNC, we are ready to ask for the supervision and control by ANAN or United Nations or Security Council. And we request, and we call to put all the Syrian military let's say, bases and nuclear and chemical weapons under control. We do that. We call for that. And we feel
the problem, of course,
the liable risk comes from Assad, who will use these weapons, and when he feels that he will get defeated, he might come to use these weapons. So we call on United Nations and European Union to have a security decision on Article 7 to put all these chemical weapons under control. We do that. We call for that.
Stefan Buchen, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think Habib is voicing the hopes of the Arab Spring, which concern all the Arab countries, not only Syria, hope for a transition to a democratic system. And this hope may materialize in Tunisia, maybe in Egypt, but it will be very difficult that this hope materializes in Syria after this war, which did not end yet, and we don't know how much time it will last. And I think the major antagonism today in Syria is the antagonism between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Yeah. Saudi Arabia has been trying to undermine the supremacy of the Assad regime in Syria for years. This happened far from the eyes of the Western media and even of Western policymakers. Wahhabi networks have been infiltrating Syria for years now to turn the Sunnite society more religious and to shape in a sharper form the religious identity of this community. And this is actually now the strategic basis for the Saudi stakeholders to topple the Assad regime. And the reason why they do this is, of course, the reason that Habib pointed to, that the Assad regime is a strategic ally of Iran. And the policy of Saudi Arabia, supported by the United States, was, of course, to break up this alliance between Assad and Iran. And now they are trying to do this militarily. And another interest of Saudi Arabia in the region, of course, is just to stop what you are talking about, that there is a general wave of democratization in the region. They don't want that this wave will at one day overwhelm the kingdom and the Arabic Peninsula. So it's quite the interest of Saudi Arabia also to find a military solution to this conflict, because a military victory of the Sunnite sect, let's say, in Syria, will make democratization more difficult, and this is in the interest of Saudi Arabia.
And what would be in the interests, in that case, of the West? We just heard Habib Saleh pleading for a resolution on the basis of Chapter 7, has been completely stalled, of course, in the Security Council. Right. But ideally, what would you want to see the rest of the world doing?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to have a concrete political advice concerning action. But what I ask Western policymakers to change in their attitude towards Syria is, I ask them to be more frank and more and to lie a little bit less. They keep up the illusion. They keep up the illusion that there might be a political solution, that another round of sanctions against Syria might bring up a solution, that diplomacy, the Annan plan, will maybe end this conflict. This is all a joke. I mean, I would ask the Chancellor of Germany or the British Prime Minister to see clearly that there's nothing that we can do now. And a military intervention is too dangerous, is the outcome of such an adventure is too vague and not clear. And but we cannot do anything now to bring about the fall of the regime, and supporting the opposition is difficult with regards to its character and the unclear connection between the Syrian National Council and the armed rebels. So I just would ask them to be more frank about their being powerless.
Michael Stürmer, is that possible for politicians to do? And briefly, military intervention. That, of course, is the very thing that Russia has been worried about with the inclusion of Chapter 7 in a possible resolution of the Security Council. Russia says that opens the door to a military intervention. Would you agree that military intervention is out of the question, or do you think it is an option that Western leaders are reserving?
It is out of the question until such a point that you have a clear winner, and then the winner, the opposition, will invite Western forces to take care of the winding up of the chemical and bioweapons and a lot of other nasty stuff which is in the country, and it's very worrying not only for the West but for everybody concerned. First of all, for the Syrians. Otherwise, a military intervention is totally out of the question. The Libya example shows that the West fell apart. Germany played not the most glamorous role in all of that. And it showed that without the Americans, at least in the backseat, you cannot do very much. And one thing is for sure, this is no walkover. The Syrian army is not the Libyan army. The Libyan army was kind of preparing for civil war, and so is the Syrian army. But the Syrian army is also much better equipped, more modern material, and a much bigger thing, Soviet trained, and I would very strongly advise against any premature, real involvement. A different thing when it comes to helping to secure the weapons of mass destruction. That was done after the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine and other countries got massive help.
But
from
not
the
in a
West.
situation of outright conflict. We now
Not
already
in
have...
yes, but it was conflict management in a preventive manner, and also with a lot of political consensus surrounding it. That I could imagine, and that I think would be utterly necessary, and preparations should be made. But beyond that, a kind of now intervening in that fog of war, I think would be a leap into the dark.
Habib Saleh, we've just heard a rather grimly realistic depiction from Stefan Buchen about where things could be heading, prolonged conflict, which plays into the hands, he says, of Saudi Arabia, and it in turn has very little interest, as I understood him, in a real functioning democracy. What would you want the rest of the world community to do? What can they do? Are they as helpless as Stefan Buchen just told us?
Good. Let me tell you that Saudi Arabia is not our let's say church or mosque to whom we come back to consult and to have decisions. Saudi Arabia is one of the countries which sympathize the revolution in Syria whatsoever, Islamic element or Islamic dimension or whatsoever.
But not with the secular element.
Iran or Turkey or etc., etc. Let's focus on the European aid, American aid, liberal aid, West support. I don't mention, we don't never in Syria talk about Saudi Arabia support. We always tend to call for European, United Nations, etc., etc.
Meaning more arms for the rebels, or meaning what exactly?
No, meaning for support. We just said that we just ask Security Council through the pressure of Europeans to have non-fly zones over Syria in order to stop attacks launched by Assad troops, helicopters, tanks, artillery, just to save the people. We never call for military intervention.
But a no-fly
zone is not...
A no-fly zone is a military intervention.
No, it's not military intervention. It has been made in Iraq for 12 years, and it has been made, the Russians who talk about let's say, Article 7, violated Article 7 and 8 in Georgia, and they did that in Chechnya, and the Chinese made it in Tibet, and others did it in Africa, and the Europeans did it in Afghanistan. So when they come to Syrian crisis, to Syrian problem, uprising, they stop. One eye on Hezbollah, another eye on Israel, another eye on Saudi Arabia, and so on. It was too much nonsense talking about the Syrian crisis by connection to Saudi Arabia and to Iran. The military intervention has taken place several months in Syria. Now, we have more than 5,000 revolutionary guards fighting in Syria, Iranians. We have more than also 5,000 Hezbollah fighting, Muqtada Sadr, a militia of Iraq fighting. So military intervention has taken place in Syria, but in favor of Assad. So people never talk about intervention of the other side. They call us as CNSC or the opposition, you are calling for military intervention, and we are not liable to do that. Okay, we never call you for military intervention. We just say that 3 Iranian missile bases are built in Syria, in my hometown, in Tartus.
Yeah.
And Iran will start to launch missile attacks against Europe. Cyprus is 60 miles from Tartus, but it has been 2,000 miles from Gulf. So they are 2,000 miles closer to Europe now. You never care. You just talk about fundamentality of the revolution. You never take the dramatic, tragic elements of the situation, the crisis in Syria. Iran is involved, absolutely involved. Hezbollah is absolutely involved. So nobody talks about such involvement, military and politically, really, and all other aspects. So,
but the resolution that you're calling from simply isn't going to come from the Security Council. It has been completely deadlocked over Russia's refusal to agree to any resolution that mentions Chapter 7. Do you think, Stefan Buchen, that Russia is likely to bend on this, or does it have the influence that could possibly make a difference still with Bashar Assad?
Russia, during this crisis, has been trying to prove that we are living in a multipolar world. They are saying that the United States and the West cannot dictate the course of events, and they're doing this quite successfully. I mean, the Russians have to wonder at what price they're doing this, because they are protecting a bloody dictator, and maybe at the end of the day, when all the atrocities will come to light, the Russians will have to give an explanation for their policy. But now we are clearly deadlocked. I mean, the imposing of a non-fly zone would mean a military intervention, because somebody would have to impose this non-fly zone in Syria. And it's clear that Assad, for weeks now, has been using his air force and his combat helicopters to crush the uprising. So if somebody imposed now a non-fly zone, that would mean military intervention, and the United States and NATO forces would have to send their troops to the Eastern Mediterranean and just start to do what they did in Libya. And as we said, in Syria, this is much more difficult and not very realistic.
Michael Stürmer, probably no stomach anywhere for a military intervention. Certainly the U.S. in an election year, very, very unlikely to leap into the fray. But how will publics react if the bloodshed goes on? Don't you think that in the end we may then also see a very emotional reaction and a kind of a compulsion to do something?
Western publics, not to speak of Eastern publics, Western publics have a habit of getting excited over very different things. We have watched in cold blood what happened in Yugoslavia for a very long time indeed, especially in this country. And what happened in Africa in 1994, nobody really cared. It just so happened. We didn't even watch. So the high morality of Western publics has its limits. The fear of getting involved into something uncontrollable is much greater. It is, of course, very much a question of the public relations. Any war in modern times consists of two elements. One is the military element, the other one is the public relations. And the public relations are very, very complex indeed. Back to Russia. Why are the Russians doing what they are doing? They are denying any step forward towards a militarily backed political solution. Why are they doing that? Because, first of all, they want to show the United States, against us and without us, you can't do anything. A strategy of denial and a strategy of keeping the rank of a world power, which there aren't really. And Tartus, which you mentioned, Tartus is not only the place for Iranian missiles, it's also the last relatively big port of the Russian fleet, Navy, in the Mediterranean, and it's a last decoration of empire. And they also have sold weaponry to the Syrians, and they want to be paid at some stage in oil or dollars. They also take rubles, by the way. So it's a complex situation. It has nothing to do with Cold War and Soviet Union. It has a lot to do with old Russia, with old-fashioned realpolitik, and the Syrian opposition is caught in these almost global front lines in the crossfire. I see no simple solution.
Let us return to a final look at the internal situation in Syria. How much support does Assad still have within the elite? We've seen a couple of important high-level defections. He's now lost a couple of key members of his crisis group. Is there any chance that the regime could implode from within?
Let me draw attention to a very basic point. I mean, those who go to Syria and understand the Syrian regime structure, they know that everything is centralized in Syria. They have the labor union centralized by and rule and over or less managed by one of the regional leadership of the Ba'athist party. The women union, the students union, the so and so. All Syria is centralized. We don't have independent unions. We don't have, let's say, independent, policies. We have...
Mr. Saleh, sorry, we're almost out of time. Yes or no? Could the regime implode from within?
I think so, because the army is defecting, and it will defect because the majority of the military service or military staff are Sunnat. So when we talk about Syria, we have to know that 80% of the Syrians are Sunnat. So we cannot import Tanzanian people, or we cannot import...
to leave it right here, Mr. Saleh. I'm very sorry. We'll have ample time to talk about this subject in future, I fear. Thank you to all of you for being with us today. Thanks to you out there for tuning in.
Thank you.